Hi, and welcome to VIBEZ Daily. This is a daily devotional curated by VIBEZ Church to help you practice the way of Jesus and be all that God has called you to be. You have joined us for our year-long series titled Devoted. Acts 2:42 tells us that the followers of Jesus were devoted to the apostles' teaching, to fellowship, to breaking of bread, and to prayer. This podcast was created to provide context and commentary for what you read each day. Just before our friends begin discussing today's reading, we want to invite you not only for fellowship, but for prayer as well. We have created the Vibe Daily Chat group to offer you fellowship and a community where you can state your observations, ask questions about the reading or the podcast. You can join us by downloading the VIBEZ Church app in your favorite app store. Click Join the Conversation and join us today. And finally, we hope that you can join us for prayer. Prayer happens Monday through Friday, and more information on that can be found on the VIBEZ Church app under prayer. Now, let's begin our conversation on today's reading.
All right, welcome back to the VIBEZ Daily podcast. It is day 65 of our Devoted series, our year-long series through the entire Bible. So excited to be back and joined by my wife, Victoria, my friend, Nakia, as we continue to journey through scripture. We have been in the book of Joshua this week, and left off at chapter 4 with the people really leaving this memorial in remembrance of the miracle that God had just performed. As they entered the promised land. They crossed the Jordan River on dry ground. And so they get to the other side, and here in chapter 5, there's kind of this, like, I don't know, to me what seemed like a random occurrence that was kind of like, wait, this had not happened over this time, where the people of Israel, the men specificyly, had to be circumcised. And it was kind of an interesting situation here in chapter 5. What do you guys think what stuck out to you kind of this first part of 5, as the men had to be circumcised here?
Yeah, I thought it was really interesting. I was like, wait a minute, they're not circumcised?
Yeah.
That's what the first thing came to my mind was like, wait, so this whole time we've been doing all these rituals, all this purification, all of this like consecration.
Yeah.
They've been preparing themselves to be in the tabernacle with the Lord and bringing all these sacrifices. They've been doing all this stuff uncircumcised. I thought that was really interesting. And that this is the point in time where the Lord is like, enough's enough. Like, now circumcise yourself. Because he could have said it at any point. Like, or reminded them, like, hey, reminder.
Yeah.
In 8 days, after your child's born, you need to circumcise him. Like, but yeah.
And I thought it was interesting that is what reestablished the covenant, because it says in verse 9, the Lord said to Joshua, today I have rolled away the shame of your slavery in Egypt. Just now, like now, like after, all of the circumcision, like you said, they've done all the things, but it wasn't until this point that the Lord said, now I have rolled away the shame of your slavery in Egypt. I thought that was significant.
Yeah. Yeah, I think when I came across this, what I also thought was interesting is, to your point, I don't remember any laws about circumcision. Like in all the laws we went through in Leviticus and Numbers and Deuteronomy, I don't actually remember him even mentioning it. And so like, it was just kind of like, I mean, obviously I remember him establishing it with Abraham. Like that's kind of where it started, right? Abraham, and then all the men in his camp and all that kind of is where it started. But I thought it was so interesting that in all of the different, as you said, purification rituals, offerings to give, all this kind of stuff, that wasn't mentioned as something that was required. And again, though, it is established a covenant. It's where God had already given that law to them. But he repeated a lot of other laws. There were other things that he repeated and he mentioned again. And so I thought it was so interesting that like I went back, and I mean, not that I read it all over again, but I was like skimming, trying to see like, could I find a mention of circumcision kind of in those books? And so it did seem interesting that while they're in the wilderness, for whatever reason, they weren't doing that. And I don't know if it's because they had to get up and move so often, because oftentimes when this happened, like they had to like stay still. They couldn't kind of go anywhere for some time. It was because they were so mobile that they didn't. But yeah, I did think it was interesting that it came up at this point.
Which is so interesting because in the New Testament, they are so hung up on being circumcised, right? That like even some of the like disciples that went out, like a Timothy, right, with Paul, like this big deal that Timothy wasn't circumcised, and so they're like, oh, like will they even accept him speaking to them if he's not circumcised? But here, they were literally in the presence of God as well, like this whole time uncircumcised, and I feel like that just even says something about the priorities that God had for some of these rituals and some of these things that He required of them.
When we go into continue to chapter 5, the Israelites observe Passover, and they kind of make this note that they no longer had manna. They were actually eating from the land of Canaan at this point, right? The crops of that land, specifically that year. And so that was kind of a big deal that they're now eating off the fruit of the land in which God has promised them.
Isn't that significant?
Yeah,
Right.
it seemed like that was a big deal. I mean, it's only a couple verses, but it was important enough that Joshua felt the need to kind of write it and include it, right? And then we end with chapter 5 with this encounter with Joshua and the commander of the Lord's army. Did you guys think anything was interesting here, kind of at chapter 5 in this conclusion?
Yeah, I'm like, what a sight. Like, first of all, I love the fearlessness of Joshua.
That's what stood out to me. Joshua's like, you friend or foe?
Yeah.
Like, what you? Why you here? Yeah.
And like it says, Joshua went to him.
Yes,
and said,
sure did.
It wasn't like he cowered away. Because most of the times when angels show up, people are following and praying. They have to be like, behold, do not be afraid. Like he wasn't afraid. He was. He rolled up on him.
My God.
I mean, God said, be
So
He
right?
did. He did more than once.
Yeah, you already told him nobody's gonna get you while I'm with you,
Okay,
right? Like as long as
No
I'm with
man.
you.
Literally.
So he was like, so you trying to win or you trying to get beat? Like, which one are you?
Yeah.
And he was like, neither. I'm the commander of the
that's the part.
Lord.
That's the part that stuck out to me.
Yeah.
It was the neither.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. It felt so significant because you would think at least he'd be like, I'm on your side.
Yeah.
Right? Like, he's with the Lord, and we know that God is fighting for the Israelites on their behalf. But I do think it's significant that he answers neither. Right? That he's just like, first of all, I'm for the Lord.
Yep.
I'm not for you or them. I'm for the Lord. Like, I'm about the Lord's business.
Yep, that's
about
real.
his work. That's what matters more than anything else. You can switch up on me tomorrow if you want to.
Yeah.
That don't matter. I'm not on your side, because if you as soon as you believe I'm on your side and you gotta go do what you want to do, I'm gonna abandon you because I'm doing the Lord's work, right? So it just jumped out to me that it was like, yeah, there's only one side here and it's God's, and that's all that really matters.
Yep.
Yeah. Commander of the army of the Lord. And he says, now I have come. I don't know, what did you guys' version say? Mine says, now I have come.
What verse?
Verse 14.
Yeah, mine just says, I have now come.
Have now come. And it's kind of like, yeah, now I'm on the scene. Like,
Mine just says, I am commander of the Lord's army.
okay.
But I love that Joshua fell to the ground in reverence. You know?
Yeah.
I am at your command.
Yeah.
And the whole take off your sandals, just like Moses, again, right?
Yes.
Another parallel.
Yeah.
And Joshua did as he was told.
He sure did.
Yeah.
He humbled out real quick.
He did.
Yeah. Once he knew, right? Like
Yeah.
he said, he came in there bold, but once he knew who he was talking to, he's like, all right.
Yes.
Yeah. And that's the difference, right?
Yeah.
Like, it was never about Joshua. It was about the Lord.
Yeah.
It's good. Okay. Well, chapter 6, man, it's what we all been waiting for the last 3 or 4 books of the Bible, right? We've been waiting for this moment right here in chapter 6. So I won't give it much more of a lead in than that, man. What's jumped out to you guys as the Israelites conquered Jericho as they entered into this promised land?
Can I just start at verse 1 again?
No.
Verse 1 again hit me. It was like, now Jericho was shut up inside and outside because of the people of Israel. Like, no one went in or no one came out. Came in and went out. And I love that because, I mean, just doubling back on chapter 5, even in like that first verse there, it was saying that like when they crossed over the Jordan, that all the kings of the Canaanites and all the kings of the Amorites, once they heard that the Lord dried up the waters of Jordan, it says their hearts melted and there was no longer any spirit in them.
Mm-hmm.
And so we see that here because now they've all locked up their cities. Like, oh yeah, no, nobody's going in, nobody's coming out.
Yeah.
The Israelites are here.
Yeah.
And I mean, they don't know this, but Joshua knows. Like, and the commander of the Lord's army is with them.
Yeah.
Like, has on the scene now.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I love it.
Yeah, I love that, like, to your point, you know, they end up shutting themselves into these walls and into their city that's fortified, right?
Mm-hmm.
But like, despite their efforts to keep the Israelites out, like the what they felt in their own mind would be something that would prevent them from coming, like, God goes after that, right? Like, the first thing God goes after are those walls. Like, it was the barrier, it was the obstacle that others tried to put before the Israelites, right? Like, he went after that obstacle first, because, like, to me, I was like, there were so many other ways he could have done it. We've seen God does a bunch of crazy ways when it comes to conquering people. He could have, you know, we'll see it later in Joshua. There's a point where he draws the people out of their city, right? And then, like, essentially they burn the city down kind of while they're away from the city. And, like, he could have done something like that. Like, he could have done something to scare the people of Jericho to leaving their city or to opening the gates. He could have done a bunch of things. But I thought it was interesting that God went after that obstacle.
Yeah.
Like, that thing that the people thought would get in the way of God's will. He was like, I'm just going to take that down. Right? And go after that. Yeah, you think this is going to prevent my will from being done. I'm going to go after that. And so I did think it was interesting that he gives them instructions specifically that will bring the walls down around them. So.
Yeah, and this emphasis on this number 7, right?
You keep saying,
Okay, go ahead.
No, I don't.
Take it.
No. But that's the only thing. Well, not the only thing, but yeah, that was one of the first things that stood out to me is like the significance of the 7th day and to march around the city 7 times, with the priests blowing the horns. What is, like, I know what I think the significance of 7 times is, but what do you all? Why do you think that it was significant that they marched around 7 times?
Yeah, that's deep. I don't know if I went that far because I stopped at like 7. He said 7 trumpets, 7 times, 7th day, and 7 priests.
Yeah,
and like you said, to your point, like the significance, maybe like in my mind, the first thing it was just like that's completion, right?
Yeah,
like, it signifies complete, like, all you need, right? So I think the Lord was like, this is all you need, like this is it.
Yeah, same here.
Honestly though, until you guys just said it right now, I don't know if it hit me that, like, one of those days have to be Sabbath.
Ooh.
Right? And I don't know, it says on the 7th day, but I don't know if it's like the 7th day of the week and things of that nature, right?
Yeah.
So I can't, it doesn't tell me here whether they started on, you know, a Sunday or they started on a Tuesday or, you know, whatever the case may be. But one of those days had to be Sabbath.
Yeah.
And I think it's interesting that God has them do this for 7 days straight.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Because obviously, you know, he calls them to rest on Sabbath. He calls them not to do it. And so, like, something about, I don't know. It just really I don't even have the words to formulate the thought right now because it's just literally just sticking out to me as you guys have brought up the number 7. Because that was my first thought, was like, oh yeah, 7, you know, number of completion, like all that. And 7 is a significant number in the Bible, but then it hit me as I was like thinking that while you were talking, like, wait a minute, but shouldn't they have rested? You know? And so, like, and even if it were the 7th day, like, I do find it interesting that, like, he calls them to do this specifically on the Sabbath at least once, you know. And so ultimately, as I'm kind of verbally processing, there's a part of me that thinks that, like, even in that, the work being done is by God, not by them.
Yeah.
Right? Like that's kind of even the whole point. When these walls fall, there's nothing they do, right? God is the one that actually is working on their behalf.
Yeah.
And so maybe that was God's kind of purpose for it, was to still show you that like I'm actually doing the work, you're not. But it did just seem so interesting that that they marched at least once on the Sabbath.
Yeah. Yeah, and I even thought about it, like on the seventh day, they're supposed to do it 7 times. I'm like, they must have been exhausted by then.
Certainly.
Honestly, like why don't you wait for the last day to walk 7 times around? Like, Lord, ooh, could we space these 7 times out? But yeah. But like you said, it was probably because he was the one keeping them, anyways.
Yeah.
To try to figure out how big this city is and how long it would take to. And somebody has done this. I'm sure scholars probably have tried to figure that one out.
I mean, they were able to do it within a day, right?
Yeah.
So it couldn't have been. I can't think about how large a city, as you said, but I mean, to be able to walk around the entire city 7 times in one day, couldn't have been too large. But I mean, shout out to Rahab, as we heard from yesterday. She's rescued as said. Even as they were given instructions, they were like, go and get everybody except Rahab the prostitute and everyone in her house. She has to live because she did
Protect
what he
the
said,
spies,
right? Protect her. And then later in 22, you know, that's exactly what they do. They go in and get her. But yeah, like I did, you know, they fulfill their promise to her. She does her part because they say like her father, mother, brothers, and all who belong to her, all of them are saved, right? So they did their part. They came, and it actually reminded me when I was reading that it was so different than like Lot and Sodom and Gomorrah,
exactly,
right? Because if you recall, like God, the angels give Lot the same instructions. They say you, your daughters, your son-in-laws, like, or those that are going to marry his daughters, all of them get to go. All of you guys need to leave and don't look back. The son-in-laws are like, nah, I'm staying here. Like, I'm not going with you. And then his wife looks back, right? It's only him and his daughters that actually make it out because the others were so tied to that. And so it did stick out to me that, like, in this case, Rahab's people was like, oh, nah, for real. They coming through. We're gonna go be spared. And I thought it was so interesting that they actually recognized God. Enough to actually be spared, because they didn't have to. Like, they could have very easily been like, Rahab, you tripping, like we got this. They're not getting past these walls, like we ain't gotta worry about them. I'm fine, I'm gonna stay at my house. But they were obviously, you know, believed her enough and believed God enough to actually to go and be saved. And they put them like outside the camp. You know, so like in verse 23, it's like they got her and she went and stayed outside the camp, at least for some time, until she figure out the consecration and all that she needed to do to get inside the camp. But I thought it was really interesting that her house was located in the city walls, but it didn't fall down. Like, apparently her house stood enough for them to be safe and rescued. Like, I wonder how, like, the Lord, like, maybe crumbled the walls around her house down, you know, but they didn't perish in the falling of the walls. That's a good point.
I feel like I heard that from a preacher somewhere, so that's not my own. I'm gonna claim that one.
Last thing before I go to 7, I mean, I do appreciate that, as I mentioned kind of coming into this is what it's all been building up to. I appreciate it. I feel like God didn't disappoint. You know what I'm saying? Like, like in all these chapters, like, I feel like God put on a show. He put on a show. Like, he didn't just, it wasn't this anticlimactic conquering of Jericho. Like, he put on a show. And that was just kind of a fun thing for me. But yeah, so we get into chapter 7. And man, you know, we read this and you know, we've said it before. I try not to judge the Israelites. You know, I didn't done my part. But verse 1 in chapter 7, Israelites, however, were unfaithful regarding the things set apart for destruction. Like, he gave clear instructions on what to do: destroy everybody, destroy everything. Right? That's back in 21. Like, they completely destroy. I mean, it was they were supposed to do this stuff. But they still didn't follow all the instructions correctly. Anything that just jumped out to you guys here in chapter 7 as the Israelites kind of fall short of God's standard here in the way in which they conquered this land, and we're supposed to have held some things aside. Anything that you guys thought was interesting about chapter 7?
The Israelites were doing so good, man. That's what. So when chapter 7 started out like that, I was like, oh man.
Mm-hmm. The only took was one, too. Like one person.
Yeah.
Right? So you can't blame them all. I'm like, this is one dude who brought
minority messed it up for the majority.
For all the people.
Yeah.
Yes. But it doesn't just say that.
Yeah.
Verse 1 says the Israelites. Like, yes, it tells us eventually who. Right? It does call out in the rest of verse 1. Like, it tells us that it's Achan, right? But it starts with the Israelites.
Yeah.
At least my version. Like, that's like the first 2 words are the Israelites.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I just think it's so interesting that, like, they're all kind of held accountable. It's like we win together, we lose together type of thing, right?
Yeah.
Like, we're all held accountable for his actions, because what I would assume is that somebody should have been like, Achan, bro, don't do that.
Yeah.
Don't do that,
Absolutely.
man. That ain't the right way to approach this. You know what I'm saying? And so, like, you're right. It was one to mess it up for everybody, but I think it was interesting that this doesn't start with Achan messed up. It's like the Israelites were unfaithful.
Yep.
I don't know. That's so crazy to me. But
I love this. Oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
It's in verse 2, though. I just kind of noted that, like, between Ai and Bethel was exactly where Abraham used to camp. And so I was just like, oh, here it is. Like, they are here at the place that the Lord told him that he was going to have, and that, like, Abraham himself was at. So it was kind of cool just seeing the same names of places.
Yeah. Also, that was kind of gangster. Like, we ain't got to send everybody, man. Just send a couple thousand to go take on Ai. Like, send a couple thousand. Don't wear everybody out. Everybody got to be tired for this. Like, just send a few.
I love the accountability thing that you said, though. Like, I feel like that's how we should all be. Like, that's how us as Christians should be.
Yes, as the church.
Right, as the church, right? Like, that, like, we are one. We should be one. We should be united. I mean, that's what we teach in sororities and fraternities. Like, listen, we all in this together. When one person messes up, like, everyone is messed up, right? Like, and so, it is something to really, like, I don't know, like, feel the weight of, right? Because sometimes you just feel like, what I do doesn't affect anybody.
Yeah.
And what I do is what I do, and there's no... Why are you worried about what I do? Because it's about me and my relationship with the Lord.
Yeah.
But here it does show, like, that the Lord, he did consider them, like, as one people. And he still wants us to be, and that's his prayer, for us to be united in one, as one people.
Yeah, and I was gonna say, or worse yet, it's the other way, right? Like, how quick are we to see pastor such and such fall, and we want to just quickly be like, ooh, that, and instead of thinking like, that's us.
We all took a hit.
We took a hit, right? Like, like, man, let me pray for my brother, my sister. Let me come alongside. Let's hold them accountable. Let's figure out how we move forward together, rather than ostracizing or kicking them out, or again casting stones because that's them over there, that's not us. And like, we got to take ownership that anything they do, I did. Anything that happens, we all are accountable for that. So that's good. Really kind of relating that to today for us. It's good. Into chapter 7, I thought was interesting, just kind of this, you've brought up before kind of the Urim and the Thummim, like the ways in which they would judge things. And, we have this situation where in order to ultimately find that it's Achan who does it, they essentially, call for all the tribes and then all the families of that tribe. And then, like, they kind of have this way that feels almost by random, but as they're, casting lots or taking chances, like, it ultimately comes forward who was guilty. And yeah, man, Achan has to pay the price for his sin in that regard. But chapter 8, they continue their conquest. So I'll say, even for me personally, like when I read Joshua in the past, or even just think about the book of Joshua, I think personally I've always kind of I kind of forget that there's more beyond Jericho.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
That it often feels like when Jericho was conquered, they entered the promised land, they rested. But like God sends them to, as we'll continue to read, like they conquered so many different lands and peoples along the way. And so Jericho is just kind of like, I wouldn't even say stop number one, because really on the other side of the Jordan, there were those kings that they had to conquer. But Jericho essentially is kind of the first city to fall. So we get to Ai, and they have to conquer Ai as well. Anything that you guys saw here in chapter 8 that was interesting to you all, that you want to call out, particularly in this first part when they go to go after Ai?
I just love that the Lord keeps encouraging Joshua before every feat. You know, in verse 1, he says it again: "Do not be afraid or discouraged. Take the entire army and attack Ai."
Yeah.
And I love that this happens. I love that God allowed them to experience what happened in chapter 7.
Yeah.
Right? That like, it's not by you guys' own might. It's because when I say go and you do it the way that I ask you to do it. Isn't back in chapter 7, it's just like, you cannot stand against your enemies.
Yeah.
You know? Like, not in this way. But now he is giving them the permission to like go and don't be afraid, because everything's in order.
Yeah.
And so when I say you can go and that everything will be okay, just know that it will be, because I'm the one fighting for you. And so like, I think if they would have went through and just started slaughtering town after town, that could have become very prideful.
Yeah,
right? Like,
certainly.
Oh yeah, like, we got this. And it was showing that they were a little bit prideful, because it was like, oh yeah, I only sent a few thousand, right?
Yeah.
But like here, when we actually see that they conquered, it was more of like a step-by-step instruction, just kind of like it was in Jericho, right?
Certainly.
Like, command them to do this and lay an ambush behind the city, and but don't go too far from the city, and you know, all that stuff. Like, and so he's giving instruction, and it is kind of like, we will be conquerors as long as the Lord's with us and we do it just how the Lord's asked us to.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And it comes after the Israelites were in fear, because I mean I know some parts of them may have been prideful especially after the walls of Jericho came down,
Right.
But it says going back to 7 for just a minute, it says the Israelites were paralyzed with fear at the turn of the events after they were defeated by Ai, and it says their courage had melted away. So it's like everything that they had built up had gone down again,
Right.
And so it stood out to me in chapter 8. The Lord encourages Joshua again. It says, okay, like, let's build the courage back up. Don't be afraid.
Yeah.
And, I've given you the king of Ai this time. So y'all good.
Yeah, it's good. Yeah, I think like, as a fan of history, I know I didn't pick history as my favorite type of genre, but as a fan of history in general, there's a part of me that really just loves some of the military strategy part of chapter 8, right? This like drawing them out, and then you know, kind of that distraction piece, and then ambush, and like all of that kind of happens. Like, there's a part of it that like it was just really impressive, even some of the strategy, like just military strategy that they engaged in. But as you said, it was obviously with the Lord's wisdom and guidance and direction, which they didn't have before. So
And then I see just another parallel between Joshua and Moses again in verse 26, where like Joshua's like holding this javelin, and he says that like he didn't like draw his hand back or take it down until he devoted all the inhabitants of Ai to destruction. And so it's kind of like he just kept that arm up with the javelin, like Moses did at one point with the staff. Remember, that was the first battle that Joshua went.
Joshua led that battle, right?
He led that battle and fought
against the Ammonites,
And now here he is, the one holding his arm up for the victory.
Yeah. I thought it was interesting, though. He didn't need no help.
Moses
had to get sit on a rock, and Aaron and Hur had to help him keep his arm up.
Yep.
But at least we don't see it. Maybe he did, but yeah, that was very interesting. That's good. I didn't see that.
Very good.
That's good. I think that's Exodus 17 that you're referring to. I know that because I love that particular passage. But good. So end of 8. You know, my Bible kind of ties to just this renewed commitment to the law, right?
Yeah.
So they really kind of take an opportunity to build an altar again, and you know, do it according to the law. And so, anything that you guys thought was interesting here at the end of chapter 8 before we move to 9?
Yeah, the fact that they wrote all this stuff down on stone again. Once again, how long did that have to take, y'all? Because we'd be reading for weeks.
Yeah.
We're literally reading for weeks.
Yeah, I have no idea. I could not even begin to fathom what their transcribe process looked like.
Yeah,
Man.
like stone, though.
Yeah, you know, maybe it's like they had an army of people chiseling and everybody took a page or something. You know, I don't know what, but yeah, that's good. Yeah, I mean, I love 34, where it's just like afterwards, Joshua just reads aloud all the words of the law,
Yeah.
the blessings as well as the curses,
Yes.
right? According to all that is written in the book of the law. And there was not a word of all that Moses had commanded that Joshua did not read
Right.
for the entire assembly of Israel, including the women, the dependents, and the resident aliens who lived among them. Like, it was just like, yo, I'm reading every word. Everybody is held accountable to this. I don't care who you are, where you came from. If you're living in this land or you're among us, you're held accountable to these words. And so,
Don't listen up, Rahab.
real talk. Yeah, you too now. You part of this, which she didn't even know how part of it she was.
My God.
Good. Okay. Well, we'll close out here with chapter 9 for the day. And, you know, Israelites keep going back and forth. It feels like every odd chapter, the Israelites is out of the will of God or something. Because, you know, conquer Jericho. Yeah, right.
Fail.
And then, you know, fail. Chapter 7. We go conquer Ai in chapter 8 and then fail. And here we go. So, yeah, they're deceived by this group, the Gibeonites. Really, just talk to me about what stuck out to you guys here in chapter 9. Yeah, as they kind of move without the Lord's blessing here.
I think it's really clever on the Gershonites, you know, behalf. Like, the Gershonites, right? Gibeonites. I'm sorry. I'm calling them the wrong thing. The Gibeonites. I think it was really clever of you guys. So I understand, but it just, like I said, once again, when we get to verse 14, it kind of just broke my heart. Like, they took the revisions and they looked at it with their eyes, right? But they didn't seek and ask counsel from the Lord.
Jesus.
And it's like that part where it's kind of like, wow, like we can be deceived.
Yeah.
But we need the Lord to, like, reveal these things to us, because I'm sure if the Lord, and if they would have the Lord been like, no, do not, because they're your neighbors, they're right here among you, and he would have revealed who they were to them. But yeah, so it's kind of like, yeah, we don't, the whole like trust in the Lord with all your heart and do not lean on your own understanding, you know, that verse comes into play like here, because it's like, ooh, we can't just rely on our own practicality, because it seems like they took the revisions. It was like, oh yeah, this is old and moldy. Yeah, it makes sense. They had a long journey. So yeah, it's just heartbreaking.
Yeah, but I think that's a good point, because I mean, we saw it just 2 chapters before, right? Like when it came to trying to reveal who it was that had kind of misappropriated the things, and when they revealed Achan, like that wasn't their own understanding to discover Achan. Like it was through God's wisdom and discernment that Achan is brought forth as the person who, you know, had defiled God in that. And so I think like we see that constantly in scripture, that God gives that wisdom. Like I recall we had a conversation before about Moses not having an answer once to a problem, and like he was like, hold on, let me go seek the Lord and ask him, right? And it was one of those things where to me I was like, there's a logical explanation here. I think it was when some of them couldn't do Passover. There were people who were unclean because they had like touched blood or something, and they couldn't participate in Passover. And they were like, well, what do we do? And so he was like, hold on, I don't have an answer. Let me go see the Lord. And he's like, well, okay, you can do it next month, right? Like, and so he comes up with this thing, but it was because he sought the Lord's, opinion. And I think, like, yes, he absolutely can give us that when we seek him, and we see that, as you said, what happens when we try to, which what I said back then, I would have done the same. I would have used my own logic, and reason, and my own understanding, and say, this all adds up. This is rational. Let's move forward. And I think it does really challenge us to, even when it's rational and it makes sense, make sure we seek the Lord for it.
I feel like I'm like always repeating myself throughout the day with the kids, like, just stop and ask, mommy. Like, just ask me and I can help you with this. And here they done gone and messed up their craft or messed up whatever they're supposed to be doing, or they're doing something the wrong way, because in their own mind, like, oh yeah, I can figure this out. This is how this goes. Certainly this is how this works. And I'm just like, if you would just pause for a moment and just ask mommy, is this okay? Is this the right way I'm supposed to be doing this? Like, I can help you with this. And I think for me, it's such a good reminder that I move so fast throughout the day that, like, a lot of times I'm not pausing to ask the Lord, like, is this what I should be doing? Yeah. Is this what I'll be focusing on? Like,
that's a good observation.
On the call, like, is this a scam? Is this a scam, Lord? Like, which it was the other day.
It was.
I was like, he's working at me, because I was like, I thought the Holy Spirit was like, and I was like, it sounded good at first. I was like, something's not settling. Let me talk to my husband about this first, some wisdom. But yeah.
That's good. Okay. Anything else here in chapter 9?
I think it just shows here, because I think it says this like in the New Testament somewhere, but even here it shows how deceiving the heart can be. Because we do have our own, logic and idea, and we think we can carry something out on our own without the Lord's wisdom. But I think we see here in 9, like, even though it's not, explicitly said, your heart is deceitful.
Yeah.
Don't follow it.
That's good.
Don't follow it.
Yeah.
That's good. Don't want to hear that. We don't want to hear that, especially these days.
Nah.
Everybody, follow your heart.
Yeah.
That's
a common saying.
Follow your heart. That's all they say these days. Follow it. You do what you love.
Loud and wrong.
You.
Good. Okay. Well, that brings us to the conclusion of today's reading. We'll be back to chapter 10 tomorrow, and we'll continue through the book of Joshua. Should breeze through the next few days a little bit. Content is what we'll see here is a little light on a lot of discussion, but we will pause and move through it at the Lord's pace throughout this week. But hopefully this was helpful. Look forward to seeing you tomorrow, and until then, take care.
Thank you for joining us for the VIBEZ Daily podcast. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform, or download our favorite, the VIBEZ Church app. Visit vibes.church/devoted for additional episodes, notes, details, and the latest merch. Join us next time as we continue